I'm Daniel Lanza Rivers. I'm coming to you from a lonely land. I use they, them pronouns. And for a visual description, I'm a white genderqueer person with long curly hair, what used to be a big red beard that has like a big white stripe in it. Behind me, you've got an untidy bookshelf, a sort of Hugo wall hanging, and cabinet that's actually holding a Murphy bed. So I'm going to read, I just dropped a link in chat. I'm going to read an excerpt from an essay called Nevada that you can find on terrain.org. There's also an audiobook of it up there. It's a sort of a ghost story about a rug made from a black bear skin that I inherited from my mom's estranged father, along with a pistol without a safety, and eventually a years-long moth infestation. This piece comes sort of from the denouement. 8 months after we moved my grandfather out of his house, I make the trip back to Fresno with my dad. We're visiting the vet's home for lunch, and afterward, we'll retrieve a dusty SUV that I'll drive home to the bay, where I'll clean it and sell it. We find the vehicle sitting out in a khaki dirt parking lot, surrounded by a horizon of farmland and patches of residential sprawl. Climbing inside, I realize it's a family car, a kind of truck with 2 rows of seats that fold down and a built-in DVD player. Cleaning it out a few days later, I unearth an archive of notes and receipts, a pocket knife, some tools, and a DVD wallet. That's when I realized my grandfather must have had friends. I've even heard of a few in a secondhand way, but I've always imagined him as a solitary figure, by which I mean a person who is lonely. Of course, this conviction is colored by my own experience, my own thinking about white US American men and the social protocols that enfold them from an early age. Though I navigated the social worlds of straight men during my teens and 20s, I've always equated masculinity with a network of lonely postures, the inner self held up and back, which is to say my inner self held up and back. In those years, I used to assume that all the humans we call men are inwardly lonesome, and often I still do. Cleaning out the truck, I feel another window into my grandfather's world creak open. Without access to his history, I've come to think of the objects that pass between us as further points in a constellation of inference and imagination and loss. When I chart this constellation, the profile that comes into view is based in no small part on our similarities, our shyness, our shared love of books and solitude and the outdoors. When I infuse this profile with the generalizable characteristics of the men of his generation and demography, there's something that emerges as at once alienating, elusive, and somehow achingly familiar. It's true that part of his body lives on in my own, but it's a truth that I have to remind myself of, and it has always felt alien to me to look for it. Much as my grandmother reminded me about our similarities of character, she never pointed out the traces of his face that graced my own. Even now, I wouldn't know how to look for them without a reference. A photo of him standing somewhere, animated by some public emotion. When I reach for his features, my thoughts drift back to a photo he once mailed me of a buck, standing alert, maybe stunned, in a drift of snow. A few years before her death, my grandmother produced an album with a red cover and a binding that allowed it to flip upward like an old steno pad. I was visiting her as I often did after her move north, and we were alone. The album chronicles her wedding day, and in it, she looks vibrant and beautiful, and she is surrounded by family and friends whom I've only heard about in stories. In one picture, her young husband sits at a table looking wooden and nervy. As we study him together, she tells me that things between them were awkward from the start. He never really showed an interest in sex, and he retreated at the suggestion of it. She says they were just 24 and 31 when they split. As she prepared to go, he told her that he was sure she would find someone else and that he didn't want to hold her back. Looking at that photo of him, at the startled inwardness on his young man's face, I feel a soft flowering of recognition. Even before she tells me that she believes he was attracted to men, I've begun to wonder.